A newborn baby was left on my porch, with my sister's wedding ring tied to her sock. 30 minutes later, my sister's husband arrived with the police claiming she had abandoned them both. At first, all I saw beneath the porch light was a small infant carrier and a pale green hospital blanket trembling in the cold. Then the baby moved. A thin cry slipped through the blanket. I dropped to my knees. Oh, sweetheart. She was tiny, newborn tiny. Her face was red from crying, and both fists were pressed beneath her chin. I recognized her before. I even saw the name printed on the hospital bracelet around her wrist. Sophie Cole. My sister Mara's 9-day-old daughter. I looked past the porch. Mara, no answer. A dark sedan passed at the far end of the block, but it did not slow down. The neighboring houses were quiet. No footsteps. No car door. No shadow moving between the trees. Only Sophie, crying beneath my porch light. I reached into the carrier and froze. Something had been tied around her left yellow sock with a narrow white ribbon. A gold ring. Mara's wedding ring. I had stood beside her when Evan slid it onto her finger 6 years earlier. I remembered the tiny scratch near the setting. From the afternoon, she dropped it beside our mother's kitchen sink. Mara never took it off. Not during pregnancy. Not at the hospital. Not even when her fingers swelled so badly that a nurse suggested cutting it free. Now it was tied to her baby. Mara, I whispered. What did you do? I carried Sophie inside and locked the door. There were 2 prepared bottles in the carrier for diapers, a packet of wipes, and a small insulated bottle bag. No note, no phone, no car seat base. Everything had been packed carefully. This was not someone abandoning a child in panic. This was someone making sure the baby survived. I called Mara, straight to voicemail. I called again. Then Evan. He answered before the first ring finished. Lydia. His voice was breathless. I have Sophie. There was a pause. Then he exhaled as though I had just confirmed his worst fear. Thank God. Where is Mara? I don't know. Sophie began crying again. I lifted her from the carrier and held her against my chest. What do you mean you don't know? She took the baby early this morning. She left a message saying she couldn't do this anymore. My eyes dropped to the ring. She left Sophie on my porch. I know. The words came too quickly. Before I could ask how, headlights swept across my front windows. 2 police cruisers turned into my driveway behind Evan's black SUV. He had not called me because he was searching for his daughter. He was already coming to collect her. Evan stepped out wearing dark slacks and a gray sweater. His hair was neatly combed, but he had left his coat open despite the cold, as though he wanted everyone to see how urgently he had rushed from the house. The officers walked behind him. I opened the door, but kept the chain fastened. Evan's face crumpled when he saw Sophie in my arms. Oh, baby girl. He reached toward the gap. I stepped back. One of the officers, a woman about my age, raised a calming hand. Ms. Hart, Mr. Cole says his wife left their home with the baby this morning. My sister is missing. Evan lowered his eyes. Mara has been struggling since the birth. He said it gently, sadly, like a husband protecting his wife's dignity even after she had betrayed him. She contacted someone she used to know, he continued. A man she dated years ago. She said she wanted to start over. That's not true. Evan looked at the officer, not at me. Lydia has never approved of our marriage. He held out his phone. There were messages from Mara's number. I can't be a mother. I need to leave. Don't come after me. The officer read them in silence. Evan turned back to me. She left Sophie here because she knew Lydia would help her disappear. I lifted Sophie's foot. Then, explain this. The ring caught the porch light. For the first time, something shifted in Evan's face. It lasted less than a second. Then the wounded expression returned. She took it off because she was leaving me. She tied it to the baby. Because she knew you would make it mean something. His voice remained soft. That was Evan's gift. He never sounded cruel when anyone else was listening. He made other people sound unreasonable for fearing him. The male officer stepped closer. Ms. Hart, He is the child's father, and her mother is missing. A newborn was left outside in the cold, with no parent and no explanation. She needs to come home, Evan said. No, she needs a doctor. His jaw tightened. The female officer glanced at Sophie's hospital bracelet. How long has she been outside? I don't know. That changed the conversation. I was a school counselor. I had spent 20 years documenting danger without exaggerating it. I knew the difference between an accusation and a fact. A missing mother was a fact. A newborn left unattended was a fact. A wedding ring tied to the child was a fact. I called an ambulance. Evan objected, politely. I ignored him. At the hospital, Sophie was taken into the pediatric unit. Evan followed the nurse, but security asked everyone to remain in the family waiting area until the doctor finished examining her. I opened the bottle bag to find a clean pacifier. My fingers pressed against something stiff beneath the lining. I pulled harder. A seam opened. Inside were several hospital pages folded into a square no larger than my palm. Mara's discharge papers. One name had been circled in blue ink, Naomi Ruiz. A direct number was written beneath it. I stepped into the corridor and called. Naomi answered on the fourth ring. I'm calling about Mara Cole, I said. I'm her sister. Her baby was left on my porch, and Mara's wedding ring was tied to the child's sock. Silence. I found your number hidden in the bottle bag. Another pause. When Naomi finally spoke, her voice had changed. Is Mara with you? No. Is Evan there? I looked through the glass doors. He stood beside the police officers, speaking quietly. One hand pressed over his mouth like a grieving husband. Yes. Naomi was silent for several seconds. Then she said, 4 days ago, Mara told me that if her baby reached your house and she wasn't with her, we were to activate her safety plan immediately. Part 2. Naomi arrived at the pediatric unit 20 minutes later with a hospital badge, clipped to her navy cardigan and a thick folder held against her chest. The moment Evan saw her, his expression changed, not fear, recognition. Ms. Ruiz, he said calmly, I thought Mara canceled your involvement. Naomi did not answer him. She asked the nurse to move Sophie into a secured consultation room. Then she requested hospital security, a child protection investigator, and the 2 officers who had followed us from my house. Evan gave a tired smile. This is exactly what Lydia wanted. I turned toward him. My sister is missing, and I'm trying to find her. No. You arrived at my house already knowing where Sophie was. His eyes hardened, but his voice stayed gentle. Mara texted me after she left the baby. I told the police that. He held up his phone again. This time, the messages were longer. I never wanted this life. Lydia always said I deserved better. Please take care of Sophie. My mother had been added to the hospital group chat. She called me immediately. Lydia, she whispered, Evan sent us the messages. What if Mara really did leave? I looked through the glass at Sophie sleeping beneath a white hospital blanket. Then Mara can tell us herself. Naomi opened the folder. She explained that Mara had privately requested help 4 days earlier. A transfer had been arranged from the hospital to a confidential family shelter. Evan shook his head. She changed her mind. Naomi looked at him for the first time. The transfer was canceled through Mara's phone. There, Evan said. You see? For one terrible second, even the officers seemed to relax. Then Naomi turned to the computer. What time was the cancellation sent? She entered Mara's medical record number. The screen loaded. Naomi's face went still. 11:42 in the morning. She pulled up another page. Mara had been undergoing treatment for a severe postpartum blood pressure episode. A nurse had documented that Mara was connected to monitors, medicated and unable to receive visitors. Her phone and personal belongings had been released to her husband for safekeeping. Evan stepped closer. This proves nothing. She could have asked me to send it. Naomi opened the shelter's verification log. No, she said. The message stated that Mara was leaving the hospital, alone and no longer feared returning home. She looked at the officers. Mara could not have written that. She was still being treated, and she did not have her phone. The female officer turned toward Evan. "Mr. Cole, were you holding your wife's phone at 11:42? Evan did not answer immediately. For the first time since he arrived, his silence did not make him look calm. It made him look caught. Naomi closed the folder. Whoever canceled Mara's transfer had her phone while she was still in treatment. Then she turned toward the corridor where Evan stood. And according to the hospital record, that person was her husband, Part3. The officer looked at Evan again. "Did you send that message from your wife's phone?" Evan remained calm and said, "Mara had asked him to. Canceled the shelter transfer because she was frightened and wanted to come home." Naomi reopened the hospital record and reminded him that the cancellation said Mara was leaving alone, even though she was still receiving treatment, could barely walk, and did not have her phone. Evan shook his head. "You're turning one message into something sinister." I stared at him and said, "My sister is missing. Her newborn was left on my porch, and you arrived with the police before I told you where Sophie was when." Evan claimed Mara had texted him. The female officer held out her hand and asked for his phone. For the first time, I saw something behind Evan's wounded expression: calculation. He was deciding which version of the truth would cost him the least. Finally, he handed over the phone. A pediatrician entered a few minutes later and said Sophie was stable, though hungry and mildly chilled. Evan immediately stepped forward and announced that he was taking his daughter home. Naomi blocked his path and explained that Sophie would remain under an emergency protective hold until Mara was found and the hospital knew why the baby had been let alone. "This is what Lydia wanted," Evan said. I lifted the wedding ring tied to the white ribbon and answered, "No, this is what Mara wanted." At that moment, the officer examining Evan's phone suddenly went still. "There's a vehicle location history," she said. Evan's car had left the Briar Lake area before dawn, entered my neighborhood less than 10 minutes before I found Sophie, and driven away again. 25 minutes later, Evan returned with the police. The male officer faced him. "You said you were at home when your wife disappeared." Evan changed his story immediately, claiming he had followed Mara because he feared she would do something irrational. "Then why did you drive away and leave your newborn outside?" the officer asked. Evan said nothing. Naomi unfolded one of the hospital papers Mara had hidden, showing a nurse's note that Mara was recovering at the Cole family cottage near Briar Lake. "Is this where Mara is?" Naomi asked. Evan barely looked at the page. "She is not there." The officer stepped closer. That was not the question. Why had Evan lied about Briar Lake? And what had happened inside that cottage before Sophie reached my porch? Part4. Evan finally gave the officers the address of the Briar Lake cottage, and they left immediately. He was ordered to remain at the hospital. Within an hour, he had called an attorney and contacted half our family. By the time my mother arrived, she had already heard his version. Evan was a frightened father. Mara had abandoned her baby, and I was using the crisis to destroy their marriage. Across the waiting room, Evan sat with his head bowed, looking devastated. That was what made him dangerous. He knew exactly how harmless to appear. My mother looked through the pediatric room window and asked whether Sophie was safe. "Yes," I said. When she asked about Mara, I told her we still did not know where she was. Then my mother lowered her voice and said, Evan had shown her the messages, claiming Mara could not be a mother. "Someone used her phone while she was receiving treatment," I said. My mother answered that Mara might have asked Evan to send them. When I said her name sharply, her eyes filled with tears. "What if Mara really did leave?" she asked. I told her that Mara could explain that herself once we found her. My mother shook her head and accused me of destroying my sister's marriage. "No," I said. "I'm refusing to let Evan explain her disappearance before we find her." She reminded me that I had never liked him, and I admitted that did not automatically make him guilty. But Mara sent her newborn to my house, with her wedding ring tied to the baby's sock, I continued, until she stands here and tells me she is safe. I will not pretend that means nothing. Mother looked at the ring but said nothing. Naomi sat beside me and continued reading Mara's private hospital notes. One line said that Mara's husband drafted messages to relatives and required her to send them while he watched. For months, Mara had sent us the same polite excuses. She was tired. She did not want visitors, and Evan was taking care of everything. Another note said Evan controlled the car keys, checked her call history, and kept her phone whenever he thought she might contact me. Then Naomi found something worse. Mara had reported that he sometimes secured the cottage doors from the outside when he left. He locked her in, I asked. Naomi said Evan called it protection. Before she could say more, a hospital security officer hurried over and handed her a phone. Naomi listened silently. Then her face changed. Is she alive? What had the officers found inside the cottage, and was Mara still alive? Part 5. Naomi ended the call and turned toward us. They found Mara. I could barely speak as I asked where she was and whether she was alive. She's at the cottage, Naomi said. She is conscious, and an ambulance is bringing her here. My mother grabbed my arm and asked what had happened. Naomi looked toward Evan. She was found inside a bedroom secured from the outside. Every trace of sadness vanished from his face. That lock is faulty, Evan said. The female officer had just returned and heard him. A faulty lock does not explain why the latch was mounted in the hallway. Evan's attorney stepped between them and said his client would not answer further questions. The officer nodded, then told Evan that he was no longer free to leave. My mother made a broken sound. Evan looked at her. Carol, please. You know me. Mara wasn't well, and everything I did was for her safety. For years, he had called her mom, but now he used her first name because he knew exactly how to pull her back to his side. My mother stared at him, then at the wedding ring in my hand. Finally, she stepped away. The officer reached for Evan's arm. He did not resist. Instead, he looked at me and said, "This is what you wanted," I answered. "No, I wanted my sister alive." Mara arrived 40 minutes later. She looked smaller than I remembered, with tangled hair, pale skin, and a blood pressure cuff wrapped around one arm. I walked beside the stretcher and called her name. Her eyes opened slowly. For a second, she did not recognize me, but then she grabbed my hand. "Sophie, she's safe," I said. Mara asked whether the baby had reached my house and whether I had seen the ring. "Yes," I whispered. Mara closed her eyes as a tear slipped into her hair. "Then you understood." The doctors began treating her for dangerous postpartum blood pressure and dehydration. Her medication had been found unopened on the cottage kitchen counter. Evan claimed she had refused to take it. When Mara was strong enough to speak, she whispered the truth. He kept it from me after I tried to leave. But the medicine was only one part of what Evan had taken from her. How had Mara escaped with Sophie? And why had she chosen her wedding ring as the warning? Part 6. The truth came slowly, in fragments between medical checks and exhausted silences. Evan's control had started long before Sophie was born. First, he corrected Mara's spending. Then he took over the bank account and began driving her everywhere because pregnancy supposedly made her distracted. Whenever relatives called, he stood close enough to hear every word. He never had to forbid Mara from speaking. He only made speaking dangerous. After Sophie's birth, he became even more careful. Mara was emotional. Mara needed rest. Mara was not herself. He repeated those phrases until everyone around them began repeating them too. At the hospital, Naomi had asked Evan to leave during a routine assessment. It was the first time Mara had been alone with someone trained to recognize what was happening. Mara told Naomi enough to arrange a secret shelter transfer. While Mara was medicated, Evan took her phone and canceled the transfer. When she confronted him, he did not shout. He smiled. Then he showed her the messages he had prepared. They said she regretted becoming a mother, wanted to contact an old boyfriend, and believed I was pressuring her to leave. He said everyone would believe him, Mara told me, because he would be calm and I would be crying. After the hospital, Evan drove Mara and Sophie to the cottage. The property had weak cell service and no nearby neighbors. He locked Mara's wallet. When he left, he secured the bedroom from the hallway. Mara stopped arguing and began pretending she believed him. That was how she created an opening. She hid the hospital papers inside the bottle bag, circled Naomi's number, prepared 2 bottles, and packed diapers. Then she removed her wedding ring. I asked why she had chosen the ring. Anyone could think I forgot the papers, Mara said. But you knew I would never remove that ring unless I needed you to notice. The ring had not been a goodbye. It was proof that Mara had sent Sophie intentionally. But she still had to get the baby out of the locked cottage while Evan watched every move she made. What lie did Mara tell to make him take them into town? Part 7. On the morning Sophie appeared at my house, Mara told Evan the baby needed a different formula. She claimed the hospital had recommended a brand the local store did not carry. Evan agreed to drive them to a pharmacy near town. On the way back, Mara said she felt sick and asked him to stop. When Evan stepped outside to check the trunk, she moved into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and drove away. For a few minutes, she thought she had escaped. Then she noticed another vehicle following her. Evan had been tracking the family car through an application on his phone. Mara did not drive to the police station because he had already created messages portraying her as unstable and dangerous. She feared he would reach the officers first and make her look like a mother fleeing with a newborn, so she drove to the one person who would recognize the signal. She came to me. Mara reached my porch only minutes before Evan caught up. She placed Sophie beneath the porch light, left the prepared bottles and hidden papers, and tightened the ribbon around the yellow sock so the ring would be visible. Then she rang the bell. I wanted to wait until you opened the door, she told me. But then I heard his car. Mara ran toward the side of my house, hoping to draw him away from Sophie.com. Evan caught her near the sidewalk. He warned that if she screamed, he would tell the police she had abandoned her baby. I asked why he had not simply taken Sophie from the porch. Your bedroom light came on, Mara said. Evan knew he could not walk onto the porch and remove the baby without risking being seen, so he forced Mara into his vehicle and drove away. Then he created a new plan. He called the police, showed them the messages from Mara's phone, and returned as a calm, betrayed father who only wanted his child back. He believed I would hand Sophie to him before anyone asked questions. He almost succeeded, I said. Mara squeezed my hand. No, I knew you would listen. 3 days later, Mara had to face Evan during an emergency hospital protection meeting. Even after everything, he was still insisting that it had all been a misunderstanding. Would Mara finally be allowed to tell her own story before Evan explained it for her again? Part 8. Mara was still weak when the hospital held the emergency safeguarding meeting, but she insisted on attending. Naomi sat on one side of her, and I sat on the other. Across the table were hospital staff, investigators, our mother, and 2 relatives who had defended Evan. Evan appeared by video with his attorney. Even then, he remained calm. He claimed the cottage had been misunderstood and said the hallway latch existed only because the bedroom door did not close properly. He said Mara had asked him to cancel the shelter transfer. He accused me of influencing her memory and insisted everything he had done was motivated by concern. Then Naomi presented the timeline. Mara had privately requested help, and a shelter transfer had been arranged. It was canceled while Mara was medicated and without her phone. At that time, Evan had possession of the device. His car had appeared near my house before Sophie was discovered. He had lied about his location. Mara had later been found without medication inside a room secured from the hallway. Most importantly, Sophie had arrived carrying the exact distress signal Mara had described 4 days earlier. Evan leaned toward the camera and said. Mara was confused. Mara turned toward the screen. He stopped speaking. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. That is what he always did. No one moved. He waited until I was frightened, then explained me to everyone, Mara said. He never had to tell people I was lying. He only had to speak first. Evan tried to interrupt again, but Mara raised one hand. For the first time, he obeyed. Then she said she had not left Sophie because she did not want her. I left her on Lydia's porch because it was the only place where Evan could not control. The story before someone protected her, Mara said. Her voice broke, but she continued. I couldn't tell Lydia where I was. I could only send her the one person I needed her to save. My mother began to cry and apologized. Mara did not rush to comfort her. For the first time in years, no one expected Mara to make everyone else feel better about what had happened to her. Would the family finally admit how easily they had believed Evan? Part 9. My mother wiped her face and said, I thought you wanted space, Mara answered. Because Evan told you I did. When my mother admitted, she should have asked more questions. Mara simply said, yes. The truth landed harder because Mara did not soften it. One of our relatives whispered that Evan had always seemed devoted. Mara looked around the table and said, that was why it worked. His charm had not hidden the control. It had been part of it. He spoke gently so Mara's fear looked irrational and volunteered explanations so no one asked what she thought. He sent polite messages from her phone so her silence appeared to be a choice. Our family had not ignored one dramatic cry for help. They had ignored the slow disappearance of Mara's voice. The meeting ended with temporary protective orders, supervised legal arrangements concerning Sophie, and a continuing investigation. It was not a perfect ending. There were still interviews, medical appointments, and court documents. Mara moved into confidential housing. She woke from nightmares and checked every lock twice. Sometimes she asked where Sophie was even when the baby slept beside her. Healing did not arrive all at once, but something had changed. Mara no longer needed permission to make a phone call. She decided who entered her room and which relatives she was ready to see. Most importantly, when someone asked her a question, everyone waited for her answer. The afternoon she was discharged, I carried Sophie into her hospital room. Mara held out both arms. I placed the baby against her chest. Sophie made one soft sound and settled beneath her mother's chin. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then I opened my hand. Mara's wedding ring rested in my palm, still attached to the narrow white ribbon. Do you want it back? I asked. Mara stared at the ring that had once represented the marriage she believed would protect her. Now it was the final object Evan had failed to control. Would Mara put it back on or let it become evidence against the man who had used their marriage to trap her? Part 10. Mara looked at the wedding ring for a long time. Then she shook her head. Put it in the evidence envelope. I did. The ring no longer proved Mara belonged to Evan. It proved that even when he controlled her phone, money, movements, and the story everyone heard, she had still found a way to speak. Sophie's yellow sock was empty now. Mara kissed the top of her daughter's head and asked, How did you know? I asked what she meant. That I didn't leave her because I wanted to, she said. I pulled a chair beside the bed, because you would never send your baby away. You were trying to send her somewhere safe. Mara looked down at Sophie. I knew you would listen. Naomi was arranging safe housing and follow-up care. Our mother waited quietly in the hallway. She no longer demanded forgiveness before Mara was ready to give it. The investigation was not over, and neither was the healing. There would be difficult court dates, sleepless nights, and moments when Mara doubted herself because Evan had trained her to question every decision, but she was alive. She was believed. Sophie was safe in her arms. For months, Evan had spoken first and convinced everyone that his version was the reasonable one. He never imagined that a newborn baby, a yellow sock, and one small gold ring would expose everything he had tried to hide. Sometimes a person in danger cannot say, "Please save me." They can only leave a sign and trust that someone who loves them will refuse to look away.